What if the secret to success wasn't just talent or hard work, but unshakable confidence? Welcome to Grasp Confidence, the podcast where visionary thought leaders, speakers, and entrepreneurs unlock the mindset and strategies for lasting success. I'm your host, Tara LaFon Gooch, CEO, two-time best-selling author, and international TEDx speaker, and I can't wait to help you step into the most powerful version of yourself. Let's dive in. Have you ever wondered what it takes to really lead, inspire, and communicate with impact across cultures? Today's guest has dedicated her career to helping leaders do just that. Meet Victoria Rennoldson. She is an award-winning coach, international speaker, certified facilitator, and CEO and founder of Culture Cuba. She's also the host of a top-ranked podcast and has a book on the way. Victoria empowers individuals and organizations to amplify their leadership presence, communicate confidently, and thrive in multicultural environments, turning talented professionals into confident global leaders. Get ready to take notes and elevate your own leadership as we welcome Victoria to the show. Victoria, so great to see you today.
Thank you so much, Tara, and I'm really excited to join you. Thank you for that amazing introduction.
Absolutely. I find your work fascinating. You know, we were talking offline and I said, Culture Cuba. What is that? What does that mean? I would love for you to delve into this just a little bit, and why that name is something that you chose for your business.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing is that there's a kind of play on words here, which is the cuppa bit, the bit at the after the culture, is a really very British word. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm British, based in the UK, and that word cuppa means a cup of tea. Now, the reason why I chose this for my company is that the way that we drink tea around the world in different cultures is completely different. So here in the London, in the UK, we often like to drink tea with milk. In other parts of the world, that is seen as totally bizarre, and people would have black tea with no sugar in it. And I think you were telling me as well offline about your own story of, was it a sweet pea you were telling me was in your local area with tea?
Yeah, we drink sweet tea here in the South.
And I love it. And it's just all so different. And so this idea of tea being so culturally nuanced, something we take for granted that so many people drink around the world, for me represents this idea of the cultural nuances we have to understand as global leaders.
I love that. That's so interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? And it just makes me wonder how you got into this. Why this? Why is this a passion and like a purpose for you that you felt drawn to this area?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And part of this answer is deep inside my heritage and my roots, which is I have my grandparents who came from Austria and Hungary in Europe to the UK. And they didn't always feel very comfortable expressing their cultural roots.
Mm.
And so one of the big journeys in my lifetime has been exploring my own cultural roots, getting to know people in different countries who are distant relatives, but learning languages as well. So I studied German and Russian. I lived in those countries. And later on, my love of culture and experiencing different cultures led me to my first career, which was in international brand marketing. Now, I was very lucky in that I got to work in some very large multinational organizations. I worked in healthcare, I worked in the food industry and in FMCG, so fast moving consumer goods. And I worked for organizations that were headquartered in the UK, but also in the US. So I worked for General Mills, which I'm sure some of the listeners are very familiar with. And I was the person who, in marketing, was leading brands, but often working, collaborating, leading teams across Europe, and also collaborating and influencing with teams in the US and in Asia. And I got really fascinated in how we communicate when we're working in these big kind of global types of teams. Are things said? How are things not said? And interestingly, what really goes on in communication? And that is where my first interest really came up in this topic.
Wow, that's fascinating. And, from your experience, what are the biggest challenges that leaders are facing today when they step into global or multicultural roles like the one that you had?
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things is it depends where that leader is coming from. So if they're coming from an environment where they're used to working with mostly monocultural teams, which are similar to them, one of the biggest challenges sometimes stepping into more of a leader of a multicultural team is that actually the leadership style, their communication style that they're used to working very well and very effectively, suddenly isn't working so well. So, to give you a really great example, it might be seem very normal to hop on to a Teams call or a Zoom call or whatever platform anybody's using and hop on with the team and just say, right, what does everybody think? And you expect people to just unmute and express their opinions. Now, in some cultures, like for example, in some parts of the US, in the UK, certainly, this would be a very normal thing to do. And you'd expect to hear from everybody.
Mhm.
In reality, though, if you're working with different kinds of cultures where that style of contribution is not the usual way, that might feel really difficult. There might be lots of reasons, culturally driven reasons behind that, that means that you actually are met with silence, or you only hear from one or two voices who dominate the conversation. And so, this idea of stepping into a global role or stepping into the role of being a leader across multiple cultures requires some understanding and insight into how to adapt your leadership style and how to adapt your communication style. And that's quite tricky sometimes if you're really confident leader and really used to being effective in what you're doing, but suddenly you're faced with it's not working in the way you expect it to.
Oh my gosh, so true. And it's the little things. Um,
Absolutely.
I learned this just from, traveling to the UK and having several friends, in your part of the world, right? It's not normal to call someone sir or ma'am.
Yeah.
It's not appropriate. It's not normal. Over where I am in the States, that's a sign of respect, right? An elevation of that person, but in the UK, it's weird. So it's the little tiny nuances a lot of times that we don't really think about. And just like you're talking about a Zoom call, so much of that resonates as well because all too often in corporate culture, it's a few voices that dominate and the others feel like they don't have a voice. And maybe it is a cultural difference, just like the one I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely. And you're absolutely bang on. It's the little things that matter. And so that could be language, the specific words you use.
Mhm.
It could be whether you're communicating directly and to the point when somebody's expecting like not to have direct feedback given to them in front of everybody else.
Wow.
These things deeply, deeply matter. And in the work that I do, in cultural intelligence, there are 10 behavioral preferences that we look at to understand how individuals are showing up, what's driving their predominant communication or interaction style. And if their style and approach is really different from your own, as the leader in the room, particularly in hierarchical cultures, you have to be quite mindful about how do you encourage that contribution? How do you encourage conversation and connection in those teams? And that's even more challenging, by the way, if you are leading teams where they're based in multiple locations and you never get to see them because they may be in a completely different country to you. So these kind of factors are really critical for success and often are underappreciated. And it can lead to, when it works, team cohesion, great collaboration, individuals really able to develop. But on the other side, when it doesn't work, it slows things down. It leads to friction, perhaps even conflict, and ultimately disengagement within the team, which is really not great, obviously.
Not long ago, I was a corporate sales director, unknown, overlooked, no network, and unfulfilled. But when I discovered the power of personal branding, storytelling, and confidence, everything changed. I went from being invisible to a 2-time best-selling author, international TEDx speaker, and top global podcast host, reaching thousands every year. And I want the same transformation for you, to be seen, heard, and recognized as the thought leader you truly are. From TEDx stages to top podcasts and even TV segments, I help entrepreneurs, authors, and speakers amplify their message and build unshakable confidence. Visit bestbranding.solutions and let's build your dream together. Wow, this is powerful. And there's something that you've said. I can't remember if it was on your website, but you mentioned this is a journey. It's not a light switch, right? This is something that it takes time and it's not something you just turn on. I think we all wish this was something we just turn on, right? We develop our teams, we develop our companies spanned into global enterprises. And I have a good friend of mine who has a very large company that's a global enterprise, and she's going through this same journey now, right? So she's branching into other countries, and one that she just branched into is India.
Mm.
That's completely different culture, right, than her culture in Australia. So it's a lot to learn. It's not a light switch. It is a journey. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, I think particularly with, thinking about the theme of confidence, which is so core to your work and to this podcast, this idea of the light switch came to me because I sometimes work with also aspiring and future leaders who are on that journey.
Mhm.
And for them, it's, they are people who are often, expert at what they do, have years of experience, got all the qualifications. Like on paper, they look like the perfect candidate to be promoted, to get towards that next step, the next global role. But what happens connected to this idea of confidence is sometimes connected to the fact that they're expressing themselves in a second language. So English is not their first language.
Mm.
Sometimes connected to really understanding the cultural nuances of how to be successful as a leader in the cultures that they're working with. It can feel to them that they're missing that ingredient. And they might look at others around them who have made it, who are at that sort of senior leader level. And they're like, they were probably born like that. Or they got to a point and like they got confident. They turned on the light switch and that light switch turned on and stayed on. But here's the thing, like confidence, and I know you probably know this as well, right? Isn't like that. In fact, it's like a really big journey. And in fact, sometimes I describe it like a big bowl of spaghetti or noodles or pasta, as you call it, like just everything being a bit mixed up. So what happens is when we're in our comfort zones and in cultural contexts which are familiar to you, this could be like your comfort zone. So you can feel super confident. But as soon as you start stretching out, this is when it starts to get a bit uncomfortable. You get that feeling like you don't quite know the rules of the game. You're not quite sure that you are able to influence and communicate in the way that you want to get to your results, to engage the team, to be the leader you want to be. And so for me, what is difficult in a situation is people then shrink back. They think, oh, I thought I had it, but no, I don't. So I'm going to shrink backwards. I'm going to lean out. And the reality is, if we understand that it's just a journey, it's part of the ups and downs and the big bowl of spaghetti all together, it's okay. It's meant to go up and down. As we step up and grow and expand, we're meant to feel that sensation of not feeling so confident again. And instead of fearing it, seeing it as a sign of growth is super powerful. That is what I want people to really think about with this.
Powerful. And, as you're talking, I have someone visualized, right? And they are a leader. They're growing in their confidence. There's ebbs and flows, as you mentioned, there's hills and valleys. But maybe they're suffering from perfectionism or imposter syndrome. I think this is pretty common, right? Especially among high achievers.
Mm.
So many are, as you mentioned, they have the degrees, they have all the credentials, they have, the check boxes on paper, but they're waiting to be found out. Do you encounter this a lot in your work as well?
Absolutely. And look, I recognize it and I nod along because it's also part of my own journey. Like my
Mm,
own journey being very much like I'm sure many of your listeners, like high achievers, like really wanting to be the best, get the best grades, get the kind of best job. And it's really, in some ways fantastic when it's motivating you and you're moving towards those goals. But there's also the other side of this perfectionism and this imposter syndrome, which really limits and holds you back. And I think, for me, what I've recognized, particularly in the work I do with my kind of clients, whether those are individuals or teams, it doesn't matter which culture, actually, interesting on this one. It doesn't matter what level of within an organization somebody is. In reality, a lot of people experience imposter syndrome. And even those people who seem to have made it, who seem to be at the top of the tree, who seem to be the most senior leaders, they also experience imposter syndrome too. And so, for me, the really important reframe on this and the work, I'm really keen to do with my clients as well is saying, look, if we call it imposter syndrome, I understand that feels like it's very permanent, like it's something that's attached to identity permanently.
mhm.
But instead, if we kind of reframe this and we talk about it as being, I feel like an imposter in this moment, and that's a sign that actually I'm about to grow and expand, but then I'm going to build my confidence again. This, I think, is more powerful to me because actually it's allowing you to frame it as something temporary that you're going to work through. And it's a positive sign that you're on the right path. You're about to grow.
I love that. Like, I love that times 10. And, when you're doing something new that you have never done before, it's going to feel foreign to you, and you could feel like you're not qualified. Here's the thing, though, you only learn by doing, and you only get better by doing it more. So it's a natural thing, I think, for people to feel imposter syndrome, quote unquote, in at moments. But you're right, it's a temporary state, it's not a permanent state of being. And just because you feel like an imposter syndrome at moments or when something is new does not mean that you are, in fact, an imposter. I think that is so important, right? I think it's just a sign of growth, like you said. And I think it's something that we have all faced at some point in time in our lives. You've also used the phrase, which I like, own the room, right? And talking about leadership presence.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful because I've seen a leader own the room and I've seen one who definitely does not command respect and own their room and own the presence of it. So I'm just kind of curious about that. What does leadership presence really look like in practice? And how can leaders cultivate it and own the room when they walk into it?
I think that's such a brilliant question. Thank you so much for raising it because it's something I'm really passionate about, which is when I ask people, think about a leader that you know, somebody who you felt like had just the best leadership presence, or sometimes known as executive presence.
Mm.
And I get people to describe them. And interestingly, there are some common words that come up. So they are confident, they are authoritative, they are filling the room with some sort of energy. And the way they come across is that you feel them even when they're not there. Like you actually get that sense of them, even when they're being talked about, like what they're about. And they just have this way of commanding attention, of being able to draw the eye. Now, that is a very common experience when I've talked to hundreds of people about what do you think about leadership presence? What think of a leader? How would you describe that leadership presence? These are the kinds of ideas and images that come up. The gap that comes up though for individuals is when they kind of go, but that's not me. Like I could never be that, or that's not how I see myself. So I can't have that leadership presence because I'm not like that. And so the thing that I'm really keen for people to understand, owning the room isn't about being the most dominant, the loudest, the most extrovert. For some people, that is their version of leadership presence. And that's part their natural way that they show up and their energy. But what I love to focus on instead is what is your version of leadership presence?
Mm.
Because you can only own the room if you're being really true to the way that you are a leader, the energy that you show up in, and the intention to project that and expand that. Now, that's a really brilliant way for you to own your leadership presence and to recognize there isn't just one way of doing it. There are many different ways of you expanding that energy and that presence. So for me, this is the real kind of call to action that I want your listeners to think about as well, which is what is your energy? What is your leadership presence? And then how can you intentionally project that a little bit more, a higher volume to really help you own that room?
I love that so much. This is an example I have in my next book, The Difference Between Confidence and Arrogance, because I get this question a lot.
Mm.
So I use a very simple analogy. Um, I'm sure maybe, I don't know how it is in the UK, but here we had, when we were kids, we had a really big jar, like usually a plastic jar for coins that we would find, right? And we would
Mhm.
put the coins in the jar. Well, when the jar is relatively empty, there's a few coins in there, you shake it up, it's really loud.
Mm.
But when the jar is full, barely makes a noise at all. One is filled with authenticity. That's the full jar, right? That's the confident jar. The other one is not full of much, but empty air.
Mm.
That's the arrogant jar. And if we think about that simple analogy, it makes sense. And then we can automatically know in our minds as well and reflect back to a leader that symbolizes the empty jar. And we can think also to a leader that we know of that when they walk into a room, it's quiet, calm confidence.
Mm.
It's a commanding presence, but it's calm, right? That's true, authentic confidence that we're talking about. What do you think about that?
I love that. And I really enjoyed your image of the coin jar. Yeah, we have something similar here as well. But I agree. Like when you're shaking an almost empty jar, that means it's making a lot of noise, but there isn't much substance behind it, right? There's not much in there. And, for me, when I think about leaders, there are many different ways to show up. You can absolutely have that influence and own the room in a deeply thoughtful, reflective way when you ask the powerful questions, when you get to the crux of a question or an issue or a challenge. So, this, what I find people don't often do when they think about the worry about arrogance, they worry that they have to be somebody else. They have to be this very loud, dominant, extrovert version of themselves, which doesn't feel natural. Like they're putting on like a being an actor in a play or wearing a mask. And that's why it feels to them out of sync. It feels inauthentic, and it really doesn't feel like them. And that's when it can almost overcompensate and feel like arrogance to them. The other take on this that I talk about in my work is, the question, will I not come across as too arrogant if I try and up this confidence? Culturally, there can be reasons why people don't want to stand out. They come from a culture that is more collectivist and puts emphasis on the group. Maybe it's a culture that really respects hierarchy, and therefore it's not appropriate to, if you're not at the right job title level or the right pay grade, to dominate conversations. But this is the thing that I say. Arrogance can also be an intention. So if your intention is to be arrogant, yeah, sure, it's going to come across. If your intention is to elevate your status, reinforce your status above other people, for sure that's going to come across. But if that's not your intention and you focus instead really on you being the fullest version of yourself, the most expanded version of yourself, if you know your unique ingredients of your leadership presence and really focus and put the intention on projecting that, that's not arrogance in my view. You will come across in a very authentic, confident way.
Oh, I love that. That is so true. I 100% agree with you on that. And, part of this, this presence that we're talking about is visibility, because
Mhm.
you can be the best leader, but if nobody knows you exist, you don't have the influence, you don't have the authority, right?
Mm.
So you talk about something called a visibility pyramid. I would
Mm.
like for our listeners to learn a little bit about that as well. Why do you see this visibility as a career accelerator, and what first steps can leaders take to start building it in this global economy?
Yeah. The reason I developed the visibility pyramid was that I would also see people getting really stuck on this idea of, but I don't know like how to influence the situation to get promoted, to get to the next level. Like I don't know how to make that happen beyond working harder and harder and doing more work. And
Mm.
what I noticed is it's very rarely about doing more work. As I say, often the people who have identified themselves as ready for that next level, they've already got all that amazing experience. They've already got all the amazing qualifications and skills that would make them prime candidates for that career acceleration, the career advancement. So, what it comes down to is recognizing visibility is key. And you can never guarantee the results of this, but it is absolutely about putting yourself in the spaces where people see you. They recognize you as being part of a particular group and set. They recognize you and acknowledge you for the work that you do. So those foundations with the pyramid, like it starts really right at the sort of bottom of the foundations, saying, who needs to see more of what you do? And, ultimately, these are the people who might have influence on the decision, on talent decisions. They might have influence on your career trajectory. They're the people who might be further up the chain, but again, are really important to understand who you are and what you do, how you add value. So once you understand those people, it's making sure they know who you are and the great work that you're doing.
Yeah.
That means moving up that visibility, you've got to talk about it. You've got to share it. And this is the bit where people often kind of feels quite stuck They don't feel very comfortable talking about their achievements, what they're doing, how they're doing it. And again, culturally, if in global teams, some people just don't feel very comfortable doing that. Again, they worry about being too much, too arrogant. Um, but the reality is, if you are like the best kept secret, nobody's really going to kind of back you. And ultimately, sometimes it's about putting yourself in front of the right people in spaces, getting to know people who are further up that chain so they can get to know you and really appreciate the amazing talent that you are. And so, those foundations, knowing who needs to see you, getting in the right spaces is absolutely critical.
Oh, well, I love this. And I preach this to my clients with our branding agency all the time, right? Because I tell them that the difference between a subject matter expert and a thought leader is exactly what you're saying. One is a subject matter expert. They've worked years in their field. They're an expert, they're an authority at whatever it is that they're doing. But they're not widely known. And that's a problem, right? So a thought leader is someone that can transcend that knowledge and communicate that knowledge to a wide amount of people and ultimately become recognized in their field of study as that subject matter expert, as that authority, as that leader, right? So I think this is such an important thing to know that we can really impact the world on such a large level by stepping into visibility, by owning true, authentic confidence, and ultimately developing, an intelligence for culture and just understanding that it's more than just this one part of the world that we're in, that we can actually have an impact on the world at large with this. So I really love that.
Mm.
For anybody listening right now, for any leader who's listening, they're probably wanting to know the first step they can take. So, what do you think, Victoria? What are some of the first steps for an aspiring global leader
Hmm.
listening to this right now? What can they do today to start moving in this direction?
So I think this really comes down to understanding where you particularly need to focus. So thinking about the listeners, where is it you are needing to work first? And the way that I think about this is that there are four key pillars that make up what I call global leader communication. And these are four pillars. They feature in my new upcoming book, which you kindly mentioned at the start. And those pillars are empower your confidence, master your clarity to elevate your influence, bridge challenging conversations, and connect with cultural intelligence.
Mhm.
Now, why those four? Through my work over the last 10 years in this area, helping people with their global leadership expansion, what I've really noticed is it's these areas in the way that people show up, be visible, how they communicate. Are the differentiating factors that enables them to finally be seen, to get recognized, to get that promotion. And so rather than prescribing one particular first step, I'd really put it to your listeners. When I talk about those four pillars, which one particularly resonates with you? Is it confidence? Like, do you feel there is some level of imposter syndrome, as we've talked about? Or is there some level of concern? Am I there yet? Am I the right person to go for that role? Confidence would be the place to start for you. Clarity. For some people, they are really great experts at what they do, but they don't necessarily know how to translate that and talk what I say is the language of the business. So they don't know how to talk like a more senior leader and express their ideas in ways that are clearly understood. So clarity would be the first step then. For others, it's the challenging conversations that really throw them. How to navigate conflict, disagreements, how to say no, even. These things are not easy. And as you become more senior, they are much more imperative for you, much more clearly needed as you step into that role so that you know how to confidently navigate those. In which case, it'd be the third pillar. It'd be about bridging challenging conversations. But it's the final pillar, connecting with cultural intelligence, that particularly if you're looking to expand into a more global career or looking to expand your business globally, if you're a business owner, that this is the critical one. And connection to me is one of the kind of hearts of the idea behind the whole of the all of the pillars, in fact. Because if we don't have connection with people, if we can't have conversations human to human and really understand each other, then even though we're doing business, that business is lost. So we do need this. We need to be able to understand how we communicate in a culturally nuanced way,
Mm.
in a way that brings us closer together. And that is even more important if you're doing business and working with and leading teams across Zoom, across Teams, across whatever platform that you're using.
So true. And I love I love all of your pillars, but the one that I've recently really leaned into is saying no. Saying
Mm,
no. And can I tell you something? I
mm,
feel more confident, more powerful than I have ever felt in my life the more I say no to things. And it's interesting, right? There was a point in time when I said yes to way too much. I would overextend myself. And I have a huge high capacity for taking on a lot. I mean, I have a team, I have a company, I have a podcast, I write books. On the surface, for most people, that's already maxed, right? But I would still always try to put on more on my plate, more and more, more. And I realized that happiness and joy and confidence and fulfillment doesn't necessarily come by adding like the plate to the max. It actually comes when you start subtracting and taking away.
mhm,
And I mean, there's hardly a week that goes by when somebody doesn't ask me, we should partner in this or that, or we should do this. There's only so much time in the day. And as you rise in your leadership, as you rise in your influence and your authority, these opportunities become more abundant all the time. And it takes a lot of discernment to understand what is aligned with you and what is not. And in the beginning of your leadership journey, I'm sure you understand, right? And agree with that you want to say yes
mm.
until you realize that it's actually diluting your power, diluting you, diluting your abilities, right? What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the biggest fears of people is to say no.
Mm.
Particularly if they're on that journey of they want to become that leader. So they're doing almost saying trying to say yes to everything to be seen. But the reality is, I think you're right. It is diluting. And if we go back to this idea, you mentioned branding earlier. And I think I very much sort of buy into this idea that we are all personal brands.
Yep.
And I love that because not only of my own marketing background, and I do believe in the power of brands, but remember reading a quote from Mark Echo, who's a fashion designer. And I really liked how he framed this, which is you are a personal brand, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. And that idea for me is really kind of true, which is even if you don't like the idea of being a personal brand, you're still projecting something. People are still receiving you in some way. So the idea of no for me is being very choiceful. What is in line with your personal brand and what is in line with your goal? Is this taking you on the right track? And the other thing to really think about, particularly on the communication piece of no, because sometimes people feel this is the difficult bit. Sometimes it's recognizing it's not a no, it might be later, it might be pause, but it also is about how you say no.
Mm.
And this is where sometimes recognizing there are different ways to communicate that doesn't have to be negative or harsh or coming across as a naysayer, you can say it in a way with your tone of voice that is still positive, that still provides an idea that you're committed, but is about putting your boundary in place. And this is where you have to get quite firm with yourself around, what am I here to do? What is my personal brand? Where am I going? Is this in line? Or if it's not, then it can be a no, but it doesn't have to be a harsh no. It can be said still in a positive way.
Oh my gosh. So I have something in my inbox right now, and I might need your help with.
Love that.
Um, for me, and this is why I love how you also brought in clarity. And I believe this. Listen, anybody who is listening to this episode right now, the more clarity you get on who you are, what you're here for, and who you serve, the easier it is to look at something as a no or a yes.
Mm,
It's really easy to say yes to everything if you don't have the clarity aspect. So I think clarity is a huge, huge piece to this. And once you get clear, you're going to it's going to be so much easier. Again, I remember as a starting entrepreneur, it was really tough for me to say no to things. One, I was afraid that they wouldn't like me afterwards, or that I would lose a friend, or XYZ. And that's not the case. And if that is the case, then they probably weren't your good friend anyway. So it's okay. I think you're right. It's how you frame it. And telling that person with your clarity, right? That
mm,
this is a great opportunity. I'm so grateful that you thought of me for this project or this mission or whatever it is.
mm,
This is amazing. I would love to help you down the road. Perhaps if I have more time, if I have more resources. But right now I'm pretty stacked. I just don't have the facility. I don't have the capacity to take on any more projects. I
mm.
think that's a fair way. Would you have any pointers?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great way. And I think for me, it is about that we can graciously decline. We can graciously turn something down. So it can be about, look, this is really great, but not for now. Or this is great, but for me at this moment, it's not the right moment. But it could be for something else. It could be, suggesting alternatives, solutions. You don't have to be that person that necessarily has to do the work or deliver it. And I think you raised a really interesting point right at the beginning of that section, which is, the biggest fear we have is not being liked, of being judged, of being seen as not good enough. And the reality is, again, it depends whether we're talking about sort of the founder entrepreneur world or in business, in work. But in either, really, yes, we do like to be connected to people. And I've talked about the power of connection and human connection in leadership and teams. But the reality is, we don't have to be liked by everybody. If we're really clear, though, in our mind, what we're about, what we're for, what we're here to do, who we do help, particularly if you've got people who are listeners who are business owners, if you're super clear who you're here to serve, they're the people who are going to resonate with who you are and what you do. You don't have to be liked by everybody. And the reality is that is going to be much more powerful for your acceleration, for your career advancement, for your business advancement, than trying to be liked by everybody and then feeling resentful when you're doing too much, when you're doing the work that doesn't light you up, when you're unexcited by the work that you're doing.
I love that. So powerful. Well, Victoria, this was such an enlightening episode. I'm sure everyone took away some really good nuggets here. Um, but they're going to be curious to look you up online to find out more information about you. So if you wouldn't mind letting people know the best places to find you online and learn more about your work.
That's very kind of you to invite me to share that. So the first big point is that LinkedIn is my go-to place. So LinkedIn, Victoria Rennoldson, please feel free to connect with me, ask me a question, share with me something that you reflected on from this episode. But really importantly, I'd love to share with the listeners that my book is coming. And it is coming this week, I think, in the week that we're publishing this episode. So I would love for everybody to go buy this book. It's called Become a Global Leader. It's in my name, Victoria Rennoldson. And you can find it on Amazon and all good book places. So do please go buy the book if you're curious to learn more about these topics.
I love that. We have some synergies here, Victoria, because I do help people become global thought leaders and step on TEDx stages. So I think we have more in our future to collaborate on. But guys, I'm sure this episode resonated with you. Let us know in an Apple review what your favorite takeaway from this episode was and how you're going to take something that Victoria said to increase your impact, increase your visibility, become the global thought leader that you want to become. We so appreciate each one of you listeners, and we look forward to the next episode. Take care.